Hi, and thanks for joining me for another episode of Beyond the Pink Cloud. This is your host, Dr. Alice Kirby. And today I'm very excited to introduce, we have Laura McKowan with us. She is the author of We Are the Luckiest, and her book actually was just released today. Hi, Laura.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for coming on to chat with me. I know you're a busy lady.
No, this is great. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So I'm curious, and I want to go a little bit into your backstory, but I'm curious for you, like how you're feeling with your book, like launching today, this morning.
I'm honestly so relieved. The lead up to publishing a book is long and so much uncertainty and it's just long. So there's been a lot of anxiety in the past couple of weeks, but today I feel pretty good.
That's awesome.
It's out, it's done, it's here, and it's going to be what it's going to be.
Out of your hands. What do you, I'm curious, I just finished my first module of my second year of somatic experiencing training, which is very body-based therapy. So I'm curious just like what you notice in your body, like with that relief.
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. Well, I am someone who has at times suffered from severe anxiety, which is a really rough thing to feel in the body, right?
Yeah.
It feels like being ungrounded, kind of just untethered and all over the place, and also just a pure feeling of fear. So it feels very cold and racy thoughts and can't breathe. Today, I feel far more grounded. I went outside for a walk. I feel slower, like things are just more weighted down and more anchored to the earth. My heart's not racing. I did have probably too much coffee, but it's just slower.
Sounds pleasant.
Yeah, it's way better.
Yeah, that's great. And that was nice. You just took a little breath.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really happy for you with your book coming out. That must be a huge relief. And I'm curious, like, I want to hear more about you, but I know you do a lot of podcasts and there's a lot of information about you. So I know people can have access to finding more about your story in other places. So I'm curious just about when did you know you were writing a book? Like because it sounds like from what I've read on your blog that you were always writing, like posts or notes or, I don't know if you did a lot of journaling.
I've always done a lot of journaling. Yes.
And I'm curious, like when that shifted and you were like, wait, this is something bigger.
Yeah. So I had the idea, I think this is going to be loud for a second and then it's going to go by. Can you hear it?
I can't.
Okay. Well, as long as you can't hear it, that's great. It's very loud. I had the idea for a long time, long before I ever got sober or anything, that I wanted to write a book someday. I didn't know what it would be about. I didn't know if I'd write a memoir or novel or what, but I've always wanted to write. Like, it's been a dream of mine for a long time. And then pretty quickly, even before I was like finally sober, I knew I wanted to write about this. I wanted to write about the experience of being addicted and getting sober. And I didn't, so it's kind of like I'd known that all along. It wasn't this moment where I went, oh my God, this is bigger. There was because it's so different. Journal writing and blog writing and book writing are entirely different. I thought naively that writing a book would be like writing a long blog, many blogs. Not at all. It's a completely different animal. And so there was a point when I officially was like, okay, now I'm going to open up a new file. This is a book file, and I'm going to start writing the book, right? And that was probably in 2014 at some point. But I had no idea what I was doing. I had never written a book. I had no idea even how to start or how to structure a memoir or anything like that. So there was a lot of learning that went into that, and a lot of different iterations of, for a long time, I thought I wanted to tell the story of my addiction, like a typical addiction memoir story. You do the long history of the drinking or the using or whatever, and then at the end, the person gets sober. And what I realized as I went as I lived more of my story, was that I really wanted to talk about sobriety, what it was like to get sober. And because it's so fascinating and hard and weird and layered that I really wanted to talk about that. So my book's more about that.
That's beautiful. And I'm sure when people read it, there will be a lot of resonance because it is hard and weird and layered. And I think because there's so much not so much, but there has been like a big upsurge of like sober curious. And I feel like sober is more hip or something than it was previously, or I don't know, maybe it's just more awareness, which I think is great. But I think that can be like a misconception of like, oh, it's just this fun thing that I'm trying for like a week. And I think when you've really, when it's like life or death situation, it becomes, it's just such a different animal of,
it's a different
really,
animal.
of coming into it. But then I think it also sort of tenfolds and makes your life that much more like beautiful and glowing and alive when you're on the other side of it.
Yes, because you have gone through the difficulty. If it was that light switch thing, it wouldn't mean that much.
Yeah, that's probably true. So I'm curious too, I want to ask you a little bit about writing. Did you have like a process? Did you sit down every day and were like, I'm going to write my book right now? Or I just listened to Amy Poehler's biography. I just got Audible like a month ago. So I'm obsessed with reading and listening to a lot of books.
Audible's great.
It is. And her preface, she's really openly talking about like writing a book was such a pain. And talks about how she wrote like little snippets here and snippets there. So I'm curious, like what your process was for actually creating your book.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely did. I didn't sit down every day. I don't know how people do that because I found that very difficult. But I would say most days of the week, like maybe 4 or 5, I would wake up really early. So when I first started writing, I had a career in advertising for 15 years, and I didn't quit that job until 2016, but I started writing long before that. And I would wake up really early in the morning because I have a young daughter. She was very young at the time. And that was the only time that I could guarantee I could write. It's also the time I like to write the most. There's not much going on in the world. I don't feel called to do other things. And so I would wake up early and write then. That process or that sort of schedule rhythm was what I used for the book too. So I would wake up in the morning because I don't just write for a living. Not yet, unfortunately. Maybe someday I will. I have other work that I do and lots of other things. So I would wake up in the morning and write, take those couple hours and I would work on writing. If it was a day where I couldn't write for whatever reason, I was too tired, had other things going on, I needed to sleep more, I wouldn't. And then I would kind of review, maybe do some editing later in the day because it's different work. It's easier. It was a lot more unstructured before I had my book deal. There's something very wonderful about having a deadline that is enforced by others. As my friend Sarah Heppola said, it gives a container to your despair because writing is really, it's wonderful, but it's also not this enlightened, spiritual experience that I think people perceive it to be. It's work. It's sometimes very hard work. And when you're writing memoir, it's extraordinarily emotional, like extraordinarily emotional. I had talked about these things. I had thought about all these things, but I uncovered more when I was writing, and it's like a body processing. My body was very tired. I would have to lay under my heavy blanket a lot of days after writing just to be okay. Slept a lot. So the process was I didn't write my book in order, in the chronological order or the order of the chapters. I kind of knew the structure of the chapters and the points that I wanted to make. I wrote them in the order that felt like right. And I wrote in the morning.
Yeah. Sounds like it worked.
Yeah. I mean, and the process is fascinating. And I always wanted to know about other people. I still want to know about other people's process too, because I just think it's interesting. But this is my first time writing a book. Maybe as I write more, it will be different. I don't know. we'll find out. But you hear people say write every day. For me, I was
Right.
like, oh my God, I can't do that. It's too hard. It's way too hard.
I think trying to do really anything every day, with the exception of, sleeping, drinking water, and really basic stuff, it can often be too much on our systems. And it
Yeah.
creates like a pressure too, that I don't feel like is especially helpful. Of
Yeah.
like, you must do
Agree.
this every day at this exact time. And then it's like, well, yeah, but how's my system feeling today? Is that like something that's actually going to feed me or be beneficial to my growth in this particular process?
Right.
I like
Right.
how you talked about, oh, sorry, I just cut you off.
No, you're fine. You didn't.
Okay. I like how you talked about it being a body-based practice and like that bringing so much up. And I'm so in this like body-based mind after going through this training. Because I think, and I don't know if this is true for you, like when you're writing, it's like you're reliving some of those experiences a little bit, but you're reliving them from this place of like you're sober, so you're more clear, and maybe you have a little bit more emotional like wherewithal to manage them. But all of that sort of like neurobiological feedback is still there and in the physiology. So I imagine it's incredibly therapeutic and difficult. Like you said, I love that you have a weighted blanket you
Yes.
brought into your writing.
Into my writing. Yeah. That was on a recommendation from a friend who had written a memoir that she felt like almost killed her to write. So it was like, get a weighted blanket. I mean, not literally, but it was, similarly
hard.
difficult. Yeah. It is a body experience. I mean, I'm a yoga teacher, have been for a long time, and very interested in the body and what we hold in it. And I incorporate the body into all the classes I teach, and teach a lot of retreats and talk about it a lot because it's this forgotten, we forget that we live in this animal.
Yeah.
And that it remembers everything that has ever happened to us. It has absorbed every relationship and experience and place we've ever been, and all of that. And so it's been a huge part of my healing to just reconnect with my body and use my body as for healing and to bring it along. Not, we in the West, we just think it's all in our mind. Everything's solved that way. So I couldn't believe though, I recently, at the end of last year, I taught a class, a master class for helping people to start write a book. And they were all memoir writers with the exception of one. And she, and all of them, all women, said they could not believe, I warned them, but then when they got into it, they could not believe how difficult it was and how tiring and how much resistance they met, and how it is an experience felt in your body. So it is fascinating.
Yeah. And we need more of those. I think we need more experience that actually make us be in our body.
Oh, totally. Yes.
I think it's a lot of the work I do is really based around that. Even in very early stages, if I'm not doing like one-on-one somatic work with people, just like those initial things of like, when do you feel good in your life? And what is that like in your body? Cause so like the quick response is so much like, oh yeah, I feel fine. And it's like, there's this level of detachment where it's like, I'm this floating head and, oh yeah, I have a body. And,
yeah,
it's been,
we have so many people, like women, especially, and men too, but especially women. I work mostly with women. Their body is this thing that they have tried to manipulate and control. And it's like an enemy. Seen as an enemy a lot because it is not the shape we want it to be or the size we want it to be. And so I think we don't think of it as a friend.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I feel like then when we're trying to develop practices towards self-love and self-care and all of these things, but we're in that sort of mindset of like, my body's not the way I want. It's like, well, how there's just this massive disconnect.
Yeah.
So I think trying to like unlayer that a little bit or just get people like noticing when they feel good. I feel like that's such a huge step at all. Like just that alone, I think can start to shift some of the narrative and the way we go through life.
Yeah. Agree.
And so would you mind sharing just a little bit about yourself, about your kind of your trajectory and what brought you to the book? And
yeah, absolutely. So my book is obviously about sobriety and sobriety from alcohol. I started drinking. I grew up in a family where drinking was very normalized, like a lot of people. And we owned a restaurant when I was a teenager, and it was just, drinking was like this foregone conclusion. Like I thought everybody drank, and all adults drank. It was just something I was eventually going to be doing. I started drinking when I was 16 or so, but not heavily. I was an athlete, and so I wasn't the person that started drinking. It was right away. It was like, oh my God, this is the answer to everything. But by the end of high school, I developed a really bad eating disorder. I had a lot of emotional stuff going on, and alcohol started to feel different to me then. I remember thinking at my high school graduation party, I was at the restaurant that we owned. I was able to serve myself at that point. Nobody cared. I was 17. And I had like my third drink, and I remember just feeling like there were no problems. I felt like all that I had been worried about, and all the tightness in my body and the worry about my body, because I did have this bad eating disorder, and all my worry about food and all that was just gone. And I remember thinking, if I can just stay like this, everything will be okay. This state of being pretty buzzed. And I really did chase that. And I clung to that. I went to college, a place where there was a lot of drinking. I always hung out with people who were drinking. When I moved to Boston from Colorado after college, I realized people drink just as much in the working world as they do in college, if not more sometimes. And oh my God, now we have money, and I lived in this big city, and it was all just a lot of fun. And my drinking progressed. I would say I always had a different kind of feeling about my drinking. Like, I suspected that I liked it a little too much. And that I needed it in a way that other people didn't seem to need it. But it looked normal enough. I would have some bad nights here and there, and some regular nights. And through my 20s, it was mostly fine. And then I met the man who would be my husband, my late 20s. When we got married, my drinking started to uptick. There was like 2 points when I started drinking more, and one was when I got married, because I just had a lot of difficulty around intimacy and relationships, and I drank a lot at that. And then another time was when I had my daughter, which was in my early 30s. And I hear that from a lot of women too, that they start to drink more when they have kids. Our bodies change. It affects us differently. We're tired. We are much more stressed and need. I remember so clearly feeling like it's not working anymore. Like, alcohol isn't working, and it made me want to drink. Like, I just drank more, to try to get it to work, I guess. My husband and I separated in 2012. Our daughter was 3, almost 4 at the time. And then my drinking got horrifically bad after he left, or he didn't leave, we separated. And in 2013, I had a very horrific incident involving my daughter at a wedding. And that is what forced me to go to actually see that this was something I needed to deal with. Before then, I had seemed to be able to sort of explain things away. And I mean, despite the fact that I had a DUI, I had massive issues and things, really bad things happen, but I had still been able to kind of keep it to myself.
And I think that speaks a little bit too about how normalized drinking is in our culture. Because it's like,
totally.
Oh, you have a DUI. Yeah, so does my friend, or so does so-and-so.
Oh yeah, no, I looked for all the people who, DUIs happen all the time. Yeah. And I only hung out with people who drank like I did, so it was very normalized. And then when that happened in July of 2013, I did end up going to my first AA meeting shortly after that. And that kind of started me on the path to sobriety. But I did not finally get sober until September of 2014. So a year and some later. And that year was just filled with a lot of pain and grief and anger and frustration. And, I really thought like, this is the end of my life. As a lot of people do when they come up against sobriety, I thought it was the end of all the fun and the color and the love and dating and social life and the work life. I mean, my work life was very boozy too. And I just didn't know how to do anything, how anything would look without it. And then, but I finally did. And there's a lot in that year, of course. Yeah. So September 2014. And then I really started writing, and I created like an Instagram account that was sort of a secret Instagram account. It wasn't my personal one in 2013 because I really wanted to talk about this because it was so confounding to me. And so I'd always been a seeker, and I'd always been very interested in the sort of pain that we go through, like the human experience. And I realized like, oh, this is what I've been reading about all my life. This type of experience is now just not something I'm reading in a book. This is like coming in my life. And so I started writing about it. I started a blog. I started that Instagram account. And then when I was a few months sober, I started a podcast called Home with Holly Whitaker. And that grew to be sort of a big thing. And then so I was still working this advertising job, and over the course of like a year and a half, 2 years, all my other work, the writing, and I started teaching yoga again, and the podcasting kind of took on this. It was like a second job almost. And I knew pretty quickly when I got sober, I was like, I want to be doing work in. I want to be a writer. I want to do that type of work. Of course, I had no idea how. So eventually this is a whole other story, but there was a tipping point where it made sense to leave my job, and I jumped and started doing the work I do now full time, or started building it up. And then I sold the book in 2000, like last year, really, in Christmas of last year, not 2019, of course, but 2018. And yeah, and here we are today. So it's been 5 years and a few months since I got sober, and I quit my job in 2016. So it's been a very full
5 years.
5 years. Yeah.
Did you, thank you. That's nice to hear your story from you. And
yeah,
you're so eloquent as well. You're such a nice speaker.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. And did you have help, like when you were transitioning from like, I'm going to leave my job? And then, I mean, I'm sure, we all have help, but I guess I'm wondering with like business development and creation towards something new, or did you have any kind of a safety net with like, okay, I'm going to leave this job in advertising. Now's the time. Like what was that transition like for you?
Yeah, this is always, this is, I don't talk about this story much, not because I wouldn't, it just doesn't come up as much. But, okay, so I did not have, what happened was I had a very good friend who we are friends through our daughters, and she's an entrepreneur. She owned a bunch of restaurants, and she had been watching me. She was like one of the first people I told when I was getting sober, and she kind of watched me build this thing that I was, the writing. And when we would get together, she'd always ask me like, okay, what's going on? Like, what do you want to do? And she just saw sort of in me what I couldn't see yet, what I wanted, but I couldn't see yet. And we were up in Maine one weekend with skiing with the kids and stuff. And I was like working all weekend. I wasn't paying attention to anyone. And she was just like, what the hell's going on? Like, what's going on? What are you doing? Because like, why haven't you quit yet? Why aren't you have, like, I had a pretty decent, following at that point. My writing was being published in places, but I wasn't making any money off of any of that. And I just couldn't figure out how it was going to happen. Like I
Right.
didn't have any savings. I was a financial disaster.
Mm.
Like a really bad, like lots of debt, I was a mess. I was still very new in sobriety, um, and I was a single mom. So there was like not a safety net like that. So she was like, well, okay, so what are you waiting for? I'm like, I don't have the money. I
Mm-hmm.
don't have the money, and I don't have money. Like I don't have a bridge. And she was like, why don't you go get a loan at a bank? Like, I don't think I could get a loan at a bank, to be honest. And I don't want another, I don't need more debt. And she was like, okay. So, other people did this for me when I was starting out, and I believe in you. What do you need?
Mm.
And I was like, I knew in that moment that like my life was changing. Like I
Yeah.
knew in that moment that I could not say no to that.
Mm-hmm.
Although it was absolutely terrifying, and it felt very like, who am I to what?
Yeah.
What? What is happening right now? Um, and I just said, yes. Okay. And she said, figure out the number, figure out how much time you need, figure out the number, and let me know. So I went upstairs and I cried. And then I freaked out. And then I figured out what I would need to get by for like a small period of time. I didn't, it wasn't an astronomical amount of money, but it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter. It was absolutely an angel and the biggest gift ever that she gave me. I'm sure eventually I would have left anyway, and I would have figured it out.
Mm-hmm.
I know that, but I don't know, like that made it possible to do it then. And so my story doesn't, that's my story, my story includes
Mm-hmm.
her in that moment, in that time. And it gave me security for a few months so that I could not worry. And then I quit my job 2 weeks later, and that was that. So yeah, it was, that's what happened. And, I've since like I paid all that back, and I will pay that forward, and it
Mm.
gave me a start.
That's great.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was, uh, it was a wild moment for sure.
What did you, so once she had given you that gift and you were like, okay, here's what I'm doing, I'm all in. Was it a difficult transition with like how you structured your time? I mean, it sounds like there was less stress, but I would imagine there'd be a little bit of like, oh shit, like now I have to do this for real. Like
Yeah.
what do I do? Like did you create like a schedule for yourself or
Yeah. Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say, like, it was a full loan. It was like had interest and everything. Like, it was
Mhm.
a gift. But I always want to say that to people because I think I just still feel so like it was such a privilege, like that's not something that happens to a lot of people. And so I think I have some imposter sort
Yeah.
of thing about it. But whatever. I'm also, it also took a lot to say yes to it. It really did. And yes, my schedule and my life, everything changed. Um, I didn't create a schedule for myself because I'm not that kind of person. I think I'm more organized, just I had been living with this just adrenaline
Mm.
based life for so long. And on the opposite side, I had this sobriety that I knew that as long as I stayed sober, I was going to be okay.
Yeah.
I knew it. And I remember so many months so many days in those first months, and even year, maybe even 2 years, thinking like, if I'm not in that adrenalized state all the time, I'm going to fuck this up. But I chose to not do that
Mm.
because
Good.
I couldn't, I knew that wasn't the way I knew I couldn't operate from that place, not to do the work that I wanted to do. Right.
Yeah.
Um, and I would wait for it to come. Like, I would wait for that Sunday dread to come. I
Mm-hmm.
would wait for that same adrenalized feeling to hit me, like the fear or just that constant stress that I lived with all the time
Mm-hmm.
about work. Like, if you're not constantly on, then something's wrong. And I when it would creep up, it was like, no, I don't have to live from that place. I'm not going to live from that place. And it took a lot of practice, to just not do that. But I also hustled my butt off. I mean, I just started right away throwing things at the wall and teaching workshops and
Good for you.
building an online thing. And I mean, I sold like an ebook, I still actually have it for sale. Like six mantras for early sobriety. That was the first thing I actually made money on. Because my friend, I have a good friend, Meadow, who she'd been working for herself and for a long time. And she was like, you are insane. You have people who literally want to buy something from you. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they are waiting. What are you doing? And I was like, really? Okay. So I made this thing and, made a few $1,000s on that. And I was like, holy shit,
Whoa.
I can,
So
I can
exciting.
do this. Yeah. And then I started to develop online courses and I started teaching retreats, and it's, it slowly has built. But yeah, it's a different life
Mm-hmm.
than in every way, but I feel so fortunate, first of all, but I also feel like people don't realize that you don't have to live that way
Yeah,
all
with
the
that
time.
constant adrenaline state. I love that you brought that up because, like, back with the body-based stuff, I mean, I feel like we're so, excuse me, we're so programmed that, like, even as, with the whole entrepreneurship thing of like, gotta hustle, gotta kill it, gotta crush it. And it's like, that's so
Mm-mm,
counterproductive to the work that I do, the work that you do, the work that I
mm-mm.
think a lot of women do, and
Yeah.
probably men too. And that's interesting that that's like what you touched on when I asked, like, what was the biggest change in your schedule? That's not like an external thing. That's really an
No,
internal felt sense, but such a huge change.
the biggest change. And I still don't feel that way. I mean, sure, there are times when I get, like I said, leading up to this book launch, I felt a lot of anxiety. That's the closest I have felt to the old state and way of living,
Mm-hmm.
for a long time. But that makes sense. Uh,
Yes.
but yeah, I kind of refuse to live that way. I refuse, as much as is
Good.
in my control, to live that way, because first of all, it's totally counterproductive, right? And it puts you out of this flow state with
Mm-hmm.
life where everything is so much harder than it needs to be. Like, I keep my life very simple, very simple. And I lived that way for so long that it almost feels like like I have an allergic reaction to it coming on,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because it
That's
feels so
lovely.
terrible. Yeah.
Yeah. It does feel terrible.
It
It
feels
feels
fucking terrible. It
it
feels terrible.
yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Um and I know you mentioned a couple of your female friends, Meadow and Holly, and I'm
Hmm.
wondering if you could just speak a little bit to how you foster like really supportive female friendships and stay out of the comparison games. I know Holly has a book as well. And I
Hmm.
know you've done podcasts, I think, with both of them. And just speak a
Hmm.
little bit to fostering that nice community and connection with other women versus going down that comparison rabbit hole.
Well, I will first say, that has not been perfect. Certainly Holly and I have, her book came out last week, mine came out this week.
So
And
close too.
yeah, and we didn't plan that. We couldn't have planned that. We sold our books at two totally different times. It's a funny, like, smile from the universe, I suppose. But um I overall, I have attracted and been drawn to people in the past few years who are on some kind of path themselves, and um, who seem to be able to hold a vision for me, that, like, a good vision for me that I can't see
Hmm.
for myself. They want really what's good for me, and I want what's good for them. Is that always the case? And are we always without comparison? Of course not, because, you know, in the case of Holly and with Meadow, we work in the same business. So some of that does happen. But when that has eclipsed our good feelings for each other or our good nature, good intentions for each other, we've bowed out, you know. And that's not why, it's not why Meadow and I finished, it's not why the podcast ended, but it was in there, you know. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
do we want to keep the friendship or do we want to keep this thing going that we're doing? And it was like, no, we want to keep the friendship. And there are other factors and all that. I think comparison is a absolutely totally natural thing. I think, to answer your question, the lesson that I've learned, the biggest lesson I've learned in sobriety is that I'm responsible for my experience. I'm the only one who's responsible. And that means I am responsible for how I perceive things and the people I bring into my life and the people I keep in my life and how I choose what I invite into my experience. A lot of that is people. So I try not to invite in people that bring out really painful, difficult sides of me. And if they do, I take responsibility for working on that, right? As best as I can. Yeah, it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always a perfect love fest, you know, but
Yeah.
it's great. I am completely blessed with wonderful friendships, men and women.
Mm-hmm. That helps a lot in life in general.
Yeah, I think it's essential.
Yeah. Community and
Yeah.
friends.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, I have so many things I want to ask you, but I know we're kind of winding down. I guess I know you mentioned a few times you have different online courses, and I did want to ask you a little bit about this whole idea of uncovering your true potential, because I feel like that's something I've read from you, and I like the way you talk about it, because
Yeah.
I think there again can be a lot of pressure on like, what's your true calling, and
Oh, yeah.
leave your job and build a business around your passion. And I think a lot of that
No.
information just isn't. Again, I feel like that's much more on this cognitive level, and it's not really like touching people in a place where they can start to uncover that. And I know you have a course that speaks to that, but I'm curious too, just for the listeners, if you could offer one or two little things that you feel like help to foster that ability to uncover one's true potential.
Yes. So, I got to bring up this quote. Okay. So one of my friends texted me this morning, and he said, oh, I have a lot of texts today. One second. He said, see yourself being yourself, you can finally change. So when you can see yourself being yourself, you can finally change. What that means to me is we have to be able to see ourselves clearly and like get to know who we actually are. I think we hear a lot about self-love, and I think that's like too much to ask. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
times it's like, who are you? You can't love someone that you don't know. So what do you like? You
Mm-hmm.
know, how do you really feel
Yeah.
about this person, this relationship, this life that you're living? How do you really feel about it? Um, what don't you like? How do you want to spend your time? You know, what do you actually value? I think that's a starting place for any of this, is start to get honest with yourself. And a lot of times what people find when they ask those questions, they don't know.
Yeah.
They don't know for sure yet, because they either feel like it's very self-indulgent to ask themselves those questions because that's the conditioning that they've had, or they don't want to look because they're
Mm-hmm.
afraid of what they might find if they ask those questions, right? But I don't think you can't get anywhere, let alone live into some kind of deeper purpose,
Mm-hmm.
without starting to just have some real compassionate, honest curiosity with yourself. And I always tell people, write it down.
Yeah.
Like, that's something everyone can do anytime, basically for free. Write it down. Take a single page and write down what's on your mind without editing yourself. Just go. it can be extraordinarily hard for people to do that. They're afraid someone's going to see it. What if writing this down makes it true and real? Like it's hard. It's a hard thing to do if you're not used to that. And I tell people, like, if you're afraid, rip it up or burn it, right? But write down like one true thing. Try it. And once you start that process of self-inquiry, if you can stay in that, that's where it all begins, right? Because you can't, once you start to know the truth, it's very hard to ignore it, right? And what I have learned is that the truth about how you feel, about who you are, about what you want, once you start to, our thoughts have energy, our words have energy, writing things down has energy. So you start to have a different relationship with life once you start to express these things, even on paper, right? And it starts you on a path. It starts you on a path. If I look back at my journals, and I can see, even dating back to high school, that I was talking about how I was worried about my drinking. Like I knew, and yet I couldn't really know that until my face was like pressed up against the wall,
Well, especially when you're continuing to engage in the drinking, it offers you a really nice, like, availability for escape. Like you could know and know and know, because that's so familiar. And I'm sure for not just me, but for many of the people listening, you could know, I think most of us know that this isn't right or normal or good or helping me become like who I am in the world.
Be. Right.
Yeah. Right. But then when you continue to introduce the alcohol, it's a really nice way to
it works.
Switch that off and just keep on rolling.
Yeah, it works. So yes, start by, I like the purpose thing and the passion thing and all that are very high pressure, and that it doesn't really work that way. I do believe that we all have this very unique blueprint. In yogic speak, it's called dharma, like who you are. And I think that what you are here to do is live into that. But that just means being the truest version of yourself. And sometimes that shows up in your work, but it doesn't have to, right? And sometimes it is a manifestation of how you are in the world and how you interact with other people, and whether your thoughts and your actions and your feelings are in alignment. I think more than anything, it's that. It's like we think one thing all day, but we're doing another thing, and our hearts are somewhere else, and we feel that being out of integrity feels terrible, right? So and I think the way to begin is to start to tell the truth, one piece at a time.
I think that's wise. And to recognize that it might take a little while, and that you're on an exploration with things, and it's not I'm going to do this and then I'm going to know, and then I'm going to go from there. But to really,
you actually can't know how things are going to work. You can't. And
really with anything, I feel like.
No, but people want to know, like, what is the 10-step plan to quitting my job and doing this?
Yeah.
Like, there literally isn't one.
Yeah.
And anyone who sells you on that is selling you a lie, because it doesn't work like that. It just doesn't. We always want the plan and the fast track thing, but we ignore that we have these very extraordinary, deep interior lives, and that's where the answers come from. And you can't project manage that.
No, I think you just to be able to start to actually feel and understand what's happening in your body too at the same time is a big part of that truth telling of like, oh, this is really what's real and here and now for me. And, is this consistent with how I'm acting and what I'm creating?
Yeah.
Even if it's what I'm making for dinner, really.
Yes. Yeah.
Like small things, I think, really add up, like you were saying.
Yep.
So I just want to ask you what you have coming next. I know you've got a course that's coming soon, right? In February.
Yeah, I have a course that started yesterday, the Bigger Yes. And then I will be running We Are the Luckiest, which is the course about how to have more stability and joy and resilience in sobriety. So I created that course around the major things that come up in sobriety for people: relationships, boundaries, shame, anger, regret. That'll start in late February.
Cool. Awesome, Laura. Anything else you want to say to the audience, or?
No, this is so great. It's so nice to talk to you. You're very calming.
Oh, it's because I've been regulating my nervous system like in a class for 4 days. So this is
good.
this is, great. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.